Thank you, Joanne, and good morning, everyone. Certainly hope y'all are staying safe and well. Can everybody hear me okay, I hope? Let us know if you can't. Thank you to everyone here as well for participating in the webinar. I know it's the middle of year end, so we certainly appreciate your time, but we are very excited to introduce you to supplier onboarding. We've been working hard on it for a long time, and it's just about ready to roll out. I'm Becky O'Connell. I'm the Treasury Director. The tax and supplier maintenance areas are also with me as well. I have today online Kathy Blackburn, who is the General Ledger Director. AP falls under her. I also have Douglas Bailey. He's our tax manager and the supervisor of the supplier team. And of course, you've already heard from Joanne Callahan, our PeopleSoft training and communication consultant. Kathy will talk in a little bit about a change in the way we're going to start reimbursing students who are not employees. That's going to go live at the same time as supplier onboarding on the 27th of July. But first, I want to turn it over to Douglas Bailey. He's our very talented supplier and tax manager, and he has really been driving this supplier onboarding train, and I am very grateful for the wonderful job he has done. So Douglas, if you want to take it away.
Thank you, Becky. Good morning, everyone. As Becky stated, I'll be driving this supplier onboarding, supplier onboarding webinar for you on today. This is pretty much going to be a high-level overview of how the onboarding is going to work for suppliers and the role that the liaisons will play in that. However, we will have some more detailed training coming up next week, I believe on the 14th, 16th, 21st, and 23rd, that you guys are more than welcome to join and sit in on. That'll be a more detailed level training, but this will be more of a high level training, just to kind of get you introduced to this new process. So with that being said, we can go ahead and get started here. Also online today, we have Jamie Snelling. She may chime in from time to time with to help answer any questions you guys may have. Jamie is the senior in the supplier team. She's been very instrumental in helping us analyze and put together this supplier onboarding system as well. So she may chime in from time to time to answer any questions you guys may have. So on our agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about what supplier onboarding is. We're going to talk about the supplier liaisons and what their role will be in this process. We're going to talk a little bit about the self-service portal, which is the system that our suppliers, our potential suppliers and current suppliers will use to onboard themselves and make any changes. We'll get into a little bit the onboarding forms, which will be different from what you guys are used to today. Today, you're probably pulling that supplier packet from our website. So we'll go through those forms on today. We'll also talk about the approval, the workflow, how the liaisons will be involved in that particular process. We'll talk about the cash custodians. That particular process is going to be the same. What you know it as today, it's going to continue to be that way going forward. So that won't change. We'll just kind of hit on that a little bit. And then as Becky said, Kathy is going to come on and she's going to talk about the new student reimbursement process. I believe some communication went out about that early this week. So you guys may have seen that communication. So Kathy's going to speak to that a little bit. And then Joanne will bring us home with some important training and communication dates, some resources where you guys can find after this webinar, and then some contact information for any questions you guys may have after this webinar. So what is supplier onboarding? Our supplier onboarding is going to be a new online supplier registration system that will allow our potential suppliers to register with us and our current suppliers to request a user ID and make any changes to their profile that they need to make. Currently, what you guys are doing is you're getting that supplier packet and you're sending it to your potential suppliers, and they're sending that information either back to you or in some cases us directly, and we're inputting that information. Our suppliers will basically be invited by you. You'll send them a link. They'll be invited by you. They'll complete their information, and they'll be able to do that themselves going forward. This new supplier portal, as I said, will allow potential suppliers to register, and it'll allow current suppliers to request a user ID. And this is going to be suppliers that's already a supplier in our system. They'll be able to request a user ID and then go in and make any changes that they need to make. For instance, if a supplier needs to update a remit address, or an attention to if they want payment to go specifically to an individual in their organization, they can go in and actually update that information themselves. There are specific forms for domestic and international suppliers. That's something key to know and remember as you're sending out this link to your potential suppliers. If you're dealing with a domestic supplier, which is going to be a U.S. supplier, there's a specific link that you'll want to send to them. And if you're dealing with an international supplier, there's a specific link that you'll want to send to them as well. So that's a key distinction that you need to kind of keep in mind as we go forward with this. The other great thing that we really love about this new system is it'll include email notifications. So anytime a supplier submits a registration or submits a change request, we're notified of that. Another really good thing that we love about it, I know from time to time we'll get questions in the AP supplier mailbox that says, hey, I submitted a supplier packet, but I don't see my supplier out there. I don't see where they've been entered. Well, what will happen with this new system is once that supplier submits their registration, and once it's ultimately approved by the supplier team, the departments, your liaisons will actually receive an email to say, hey, this supplier has been entered and approved in the system. So I think that's going to be a really nice feature to help you guys understand. And that email is going to give supplier ID number. And it's going to let you know when the supplier is in. It's also going to give you supplier ID number so you guys can be prompted and know when you can go ahead and enter your payment request. Some key dates to remember here. July 27th is the date that we'll go live with supplier onboarding. So that's just a few weeks away. And the other important date to remember is August 7th. So although we'll go live with supplier onboarding on July 27th, we will continue to accept supplier packets until August 7th. We're sure, you guys will have things in the pipeline already in the works. So we wanted to give you that grace period until August 7th to ensure those things got in and got accepted before we totally cut that old system off. So supplier liaisons, the business managers identified who they felt should be or could be supplier liaisons for your respective departments. And what we've done is we've sent out communication, and I think we copied the business managers on that communication, sent that communication to supplier liaisons over the course of the last few days, inviting them to the trainings, the detailed trainings coming up. But the supplier liaisons will ultimately be responsible for sending the URL for the supplier to the supplier. That URL will be the link that the supplier will use to register themselves as a supplier. The supplier liaison will also be responsible for approving. They will be involved in the approval process. So what will happen is when that supplier submits their registration to say, hey, I want to be a supplier, what will happen is the first level of approval will be the supplier liaison. And the responsibility there is basically, hey, is this a supplier that I'm trying to work with? If it is, then your supplier liaisons will want to approve that. If it's not a supplier that they want to work with, if it's not a supplier that they recognize, if it's not a supplier that they did not, if it's a supplier that they did not send that URL link to, they'd want to deny that. Now, a key thing to remember, there's three options on that approval page. There's an approve, there's a deny, and there's a request additional information. The key thing to remember there is the liaisons will never have to worry about requesting additional information. The supplier team will always handle that. So the only thing that the liaison will need to do is either approve it if they know that it's a supplier that they sent the link to, or deny it if it's not a supplier they sent the link to. The supplier liaison will also need to be familiar with the registration and the change request forms, in which we'll get into that in detail in the liaison training. And then lastly, the supplier liaison is the first level of contact for all suppliers and their questions.
So Douglas, we have a question.
Okay.
Will we get an email to approve it?
Yes. Sorry. So yes, once that supplier submits that registration, the supplier liaison will get an email that is ready to be approved.
Okay. And if we use a supplier that other departments also use, will we be that supplier's liaison?
Can you repeat the question?
So if we use a supplier that other departments use, will we be that supplier's liaison?
So you can think about it like this. Once that supplier is a supplier, there won't be any more approval for the liaisons to do. The liaison will only need to approve during the registration. So after the supplier has been approved and is a supplier in the system, the workflow will be between the supplier and the supplier team. Now, as far as two departments using the same supplier and who's going to be the liaison, I'm trying to think of a situation where that could be. I'm thinking that's going to be a situation where once they're a supplier, the workflow is going to be between the supplier and the supplier team, because again, once they're a supplier, there is no approval for the liaison to do. The liaison is only approving once that supplier is being set up initially on the front end. So that's mostly where the communication is going to happen between the liaison and the supplier.
That's right. So Emily's saying it sounds like the liaison is only for initial setup, and that's correct, Emily. Just after that, it is a responsibility of the liaison or liaisons to support them if they're going into the system to request a user ID for current, or if they are wanting to change the information. And then you guys can kind of decide, the supplier may reach out to you or somebody else, but but you could be their support. But yes, for initial setup, once they're in, and then you can all use them. Okay, Douglas, we're good.
So the self portal, this is just a screenshot of the self portal. This is what the link will look like once the supplier gets it. And here you can see they can sign in here. This is a welcome page. This user registration tile, this is where suppliers can go to actually register. And then we've got this announcements tile that we'll put communications out here from time to time if we're ever doing maintenance on the system. That'll be useful for our suppliers. And then we've got this frequently asked questions section, which will also be useful for our suppliers. And this is just a screenshot of the welcome page that I talked about in the previous slide. That supplier registration form on the welcome page, that tile, this is what it's going to look like. So once you send that link to the supplier, if it's a US supplier, this is the register button they would want to select. If it's an international supplier, obviously they would want to select the button for the international supplier. So the registration form, this is what the new registration form is going to look like in its electronic format. And it's basically six steps. They've got a welcome here that kind of explains to them what a domestic supplier is, if they're a domestic supplier. They've got this identifying information tab, which is where they'll answer some profile questions and kind of tell us some identifying things about themselves. Then we've also got this address tab. This is going to be where they're going to give us any primary or remit addresses, any order addresses. This contacts tab is going to be the tab where they're going to tell us who their company contacts are. We want to collect email addresses, telephone numbers, that sort of thing. And then the payment information tab is where they'll provide if it's a domestic supplier, they'll provide their ACH information. And then lastly, the submit tab. And like I said, once they submit this, the supplier liaison, if it's a supplier that you said, hey, I want to use this supplier, and you sent them this link, once they submit their registration, that supplier liaison is going to receive an email to say, hey, go in and approve this supplier if this is one that you're trying to work with. And again, if not, you want to deny it. You don't want to use that request additional information button. The supplier team is always going to use that button.
So Douglas, we have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Are the current suppliers in the present system going to be automatically updated to this new program? And I think you're going to move on to that part next in the new user.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that one in the change request.
Okay. And then regarding payment info, is ACH now going to be required or still optional?
So we strongly encourage ACH. We know that everyone isn't there yet. We strongly encourage ACH, but there is an option to still receive checks, but we do strongly encourage ACH.
We're good.
So could I chime in? This is Becky. I've been thinking about the question earlier that Joanne and Douglas both responded to. Just a little more on that. Clearly, we have suppliers that are used across the university in all departments. It's kind of be a first come, first serve in terms of setting them up initially. In other words, whoever sends them the link the first time. And so that will be their liaison in terms of approving. And more than likely, because that department sent them the link, they're going to reach out to them for any questions. I think that's kind of what you were saying, Joanne, but in terms of, what the liaison has to do, once they're in the system, it's just going to be for support. But yeah, and once the suppliers are in, any department can use them.
That's right. And we, the liaison will direct them, to where to find the resources and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, and logically, that whoever sends them the link initially is probably going to be who they're going to reach out to for any questions or any updates or things like that. Although theoretically, I guess they could reach out to any department that does business with them. But, logically, you would think that it would be the initial contact that they had. So, but yeah, once they're in, it's fair game for anybody to use them, of course. Okay. That's good.
Okay. We're good, Joanne?
Yeah, we're good. But this next screen kind of answers the question about if current suppliers are presently in the system, do they automatically update to this new program? So their information is in the system, but in order to have access to this new supplier onboarding, this is the process they'll need to take.
Yep.
Okay.
So we have a supplier that's already currently a supplier in our system. The way they get access to this system is via the user ID request. There's three different options for a user ID request. One is going to be for our U.S. suppliers. If they're a U.S. supplier or a domestic supplier, they'd want to use this first option. With the international supplier, there's going to be two options. Some of our international suppliers only have a foreign tax ID. Some of our international suppliers only have a U.S. tax ID. If they have a foreign tax ID and they're an international supplier, they would want to use this second option here. And if they only have a U.S. tax ID, they want to use this third option. So this is how they would get access to the system. Now, what prompts this? As opposed to going in, as opposed to taking on a project of trying to onboard current suppliers that's already a supplier, the way we're going to get them in there is over time as they need to make changes. So if you have a supplier that's currently a supplier and they need to update their remit address, what will happen is we'll want to invite them to request a user ID here. And then once they request that user ID, they now have access to the system and to their profile where they can go in and make that and update their remit address. And once they update that remit address and submit it for change, since it's a change request, it's not a registration, it's not an initial registration, it's a change request. The liaison will not need to be involved in that process because we know that they're already a U of SC supplier. So the approval here on the change request will be between that supplier and the supplier team. There'll be nothing for the supplier liaison to do here as far as approving. Okay. So with the supplier user ID request, some of the verifying information that we want to know is what is your supplier ID and what is your U.S. tax ID if you're a domestic supplier, and if you're an international supplier, what's your supplier ID and your either U.S. tax ID or foreign tax ID. They'll have to provide their name and then obviously a valid email address. Once they do that, they submit that user ID request, and then it's automatically approved. They'll receive email communication with their login credentials.
Okay, we have a couple questions.
Okay.
So Leanne is asking, is there a time frame of how long the supplier will remain active in the system? And Jamie already answered it, saying, generally we run a script once a year to make suppliers inactive if they have not been used within the last 18 months.
Yes.
And then Debbie is asking, can a supplier have multiple remit addresses in the new system?
Yes, a supplier can have multiple remit addresses in the system.
Okay, that's good.
So here's our FAQ section. We have some kind of general FAQs that we built prior to go live. Over time, as we see, we get consistent question over and over. We'll kind of build this out, but we do have some general kind of generic things out there for our suppliers right now. But that'll build out. We'll build that out over time. And here, this is just the supplier change request. So if you've got a current supplier who's already a supplier, or a supplier who's registered and initially registered and they're now a supplier, this is the change request that they'll use to make any changes. Add a remit address, change banking information, change contact information. One key thing to note, though, that's not going to change currently. Whenever a supplier changes their ACH information, it's our procedure to independently verify that will not change. So if a supplier comes in and they submit a change request to update ACH information, we will still independently verify that before that change is approved. And we'd want to do that obviously because there's potential for there to be fraud in that area, which is why we want to do that independent verification. That could delay a supplier change request being approved. It just depends on how responsive the supplier is to us when we do that. Reach out to do that independent verification. So that particular piece will not change. We will still independently verify whenever there's an ACH change for a supplier. This probably looks very similar to the registration. On the change request, we've got 6 steps as well. We've got the welcome, we got the supplier profile where they kind of answer some profile questions, give us some kind of general information about themselves, remit address, order address, contact information, payment information. Once they complete all those steps, then they can submit. And like I said, once they submit a change request, this will come directly to the supplier team. There will be nothing for the supplier liaison to do here as it pertains to approving. So the supplier approval as it pertains to the department. So this is the screen this will be an important screen for our supplier liaisons. And again, this is for the registration, the initial registration. We're not talking about the change request here, the initial registration. Once that supplier submits that initial registration, the supplier liaison will receive an email that says, hey, this is ready for approval. Once you click on that link, or I don't know if if your liaisons work from a work list, but once they click on that link to approve it, this is the screen that they'll see. And what they'll want to do is look here at this company name. Is Big Solutions LLC, is that a company that I'm trying to work with? Is that a vendor that I'm trying to do business with? If it is, I'd simply want to approve it. If it's not, I'd want to deny it. This little button, this request more information, the liaisons will never have to hit this button. This will always be the supplier team's responsibility. So very straightforward. Either approve if this is someone you're trying to do business with, deny it if it's not. Again, all the supplier registrations will be approved at the department level. Once the liaison approves that at the department level, it'll then come to the supplier team, and then we'll review it for completeness. And if there's anything missing, we'll request more information. And once we request more information, it'll go back to the supplier, not the department, not the liaison. It'll go back to the supplier. And once the supplier provides that information, it'll come back to the supplier team. So at that, once the liaison approves it, any kind of back and forth additional information requests will be between the supplier team and the actual supplier. So cash custodians, that particular process isn't going to change at all. This is the form that you guys are probably familiar with today. You'll continue to use this form. This will not be a part of the supplier onboarding. We'll continue to use this form going forward. This will be the form that we'll use for any cash custodians that need a cash advance, change fund, or petty cash.
So we have a question.
Okay.
Abby's asking, a lot of times we deal with small local vendors who are not tech savvy.
Mm-hmm.
So for those vendors, can the liaison enter the information, or will there be a paper option for select vendors? Yeah,
so those particular cases, it's funny you asked that. Me and Becky actually discussed that on last night. We'd want to deal with those on a case-by-case basis. If the liaison if the liaison can assist them with that, that's definitely an option. If not, that's something we'd want to deal with on a case-by-case basis.
But this is Becky again. But the liaison will not be able to go in and enter their information.
Right.
You would have to have them come in and work with you at the same time. So there's not an option where this liaison can just go in and input it for them.
But if that becomes too burdensome, like I said, we could deal with that on a case-by-case basis. Any more questions, John?
No, I think right now we're good.
Okay. All right, before I turn it over to Kathy, I also want to say that Mike Staten, he's been very instrumental. He's been very, very great to work with. He was really the brains behind the operation on this supplier onboarding project. Mike has been, like I said, very instrumental, and we really are grateful for his work and his skill set that he's provided to us. So I think Mike is on the call. So thank you, Mike, man. We really appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome, Douglas. Thank you for saying those kind words. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So with that being said, we'll turn it over to Kathy.
Thank you. Thank you, Douglas. Good morning, everybody. So we want to talk a little bit about the new student reimbursement process. And this process is just for students that are not currently employed by the university, and you're trying to reimburse them for any type of non-travel expense. So they will no longer be set up as a supplier in PeopleSoft. Instead, they're going to use a new student reimbursement form. Once you complete that form and get it approved, it will be submitted to accounts payable using the AP upload mailbox. And if you have any type of reportable expense that you're trying to pay to a student that's not employed by the university, such as a stipend or a fellowship, then you will be required to use the new Supplier Onboarding self-service portal to register them as a supplier, for them to receive that supplier ID number, and then the department would use payment requests like they normally do for that type of an expense. Any student that currently is employed by the university and they are trying to be reimbursed for any non-travel expense, that process will not change. They currently go through the travel and expense module for those folks. That will continue on. So the new student reimbursement form will be available on the Controller's Office website, and it'll be out there on July 27th. It will have its own section under the Accounts Payable Services section. So you'll be able to click on it. It'll have a fillable form. You'll be able to fill that out all electronically, and then give us your information and then get approved by your department and then submit that to the AP upload mailbox. Just for some future things, we are in the process of creating an e-form that'll take the place of the student reimbursement form. Once we do that, it will have a built-in workflow, and once that's approved, it will create a voucher. It will look similar to what you currently use for the e-forms for JVs. Seems to work pretty well for us. The implementation for this new supplier reimbursement form is the same time as supplier onboarding. So once again, it will go live on July 27th. And if you have any students who are not employed by the university and you're trying to give them something like a stipend, the supplier team will accept those packets, the current process through August 7th. Then after that, they will ask you to go through the supplier onboarding portal. Any questions about it? Pretty straightforward.
I think we're good. Thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
Okay, so some important communication dates. Oh, we do have a question. Here we go. So if we have a student who is not an employee yet, for example, teaches a yoga class for a housing community, would they be reimbursed via non-travel or payment request?
So that would be a service that they're completing, and if they're not an employee by the university, because if they were employed, it would have to go through payroll. If they're not employed, then that would go through payment request. So they would need a supplier number.
Okay. You're welcome, Angie. All right, so important communication dates. We've already communicated, we started by communicating with the business managers, and then we moved on to sending targeted training invitations to all of those who have been identified as supplier liaisons. Most of you have received that training invitation a couple of times, the first initial communication and then a reminder. Some of you only once because we are, we're still getting those forms in, and then we're just sending out the initial training invitation to those as well. So we sent some of those out this week. Thursday before go live, we're going to be sending out some go live steps, some simple things that you can do to prepare for Monday morning, July 27th. And there'll be some links in there to training, and then some tips and tricks that you to help prepare you for Monday morning. And we'll resend those again on the morning of July 27th. And then also supplier resources, because we know that your suppliers are going to need access to job aids and some training videos so that they know what to do once they get into this new onboarding system. And so we'll have that available. And as a liaison, it'll be part of your responsibilities to know where to locate that and to direct them to that section on the controller's office website. And then go live is 27th, and that's coming up very quickly. So, all right, so let's talk about some training dates. So our first supplier liaison training session is July 14th, and we have 4 scheduled. So we have the 14th, the 16th, the 21st, and the 23rd. And for the liaisons, all of those dates with links to the Teams meetings were included in that training invitation. You can choose the session that works best for you. You can come to all 4. I mean, sometimes, coming to more than one is very helpful. But that is up to you. Whatever works for you works for us. And then on the morning of the 27th, we will make sure that all of the resources are available so that you can direct your new suppliers to that. You said student supplier packets will be accepted through August 7th. Is that also true for vendor suppliers? So that's a question.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question, Jen?
I can, sorry. You said student supplier packets will be accepted through August 7th. Is that also true of vendor suppliers?
Yes, that's also true for vendor supplies. We will accept those up until August 7th.
Okay. And then Kelly, do they need to register for the training sessions? No, they do not. All they need to do is click the link for the session they want to participate in that training invitation, and they're good to go. Okay. All right, so where to find resources? So there is a suppliers and taxes page on the controller's office website. And right down here at the bottom, there's a section for webinars and training. This may change up a little bit in preparation for putting those materials out there. But as a supplier liaison, it will be important for all of you and all of them to know where that information is so that when a supplier connects with them or they need to become a registered supplier with the University of South Carolina, then you can direct them to this page, showing them where they can find those resources. And then next week you will learn in more detail what how that works, and we want to show you in detail how to do what a supplier does so that you are able to answer those questions that they have. All right, so the next question is, has the training invitation email already been sent? Yes, Stephanie, they've been sent. They were sent last week and then this week. So they've been sent a couple of times already. Will this PowerPoint be made available after presentation? Yes, Heather, we'll make sure that we put this webinar recording and this PowerPoint presentation out there in that same area that we just mentioned in the previous slide. Okay. All right. Any more questions? You know that if you think of something, when you think of something after this presentation is over and the question comes to mind and we've already ended the session, you are more than welcome to email those questions and any concerns to apsuppler@mailbox.sc.edu, and somebody from the supplier team will reach out to you. So we have a question. If you think you need to be added to training and have not received an email, I would reach out to your business manager to confirm, to make sure that that is something that they want, and then they can complete the supplier liaison form and send that into apsuppler@mailbox.sc.edu. Do you have a template letter that we can use to send to suppliers on the new process? Very good question, Pam. I'm actually in the process of working on that. And yes, we will have a couple of standard template letters ready for you guys as a resource that you will automatically send to suppliers when you want them to register, or when they are a current supplier and they need to know now that in order to make changes, they need to request a user ID. So yes, we'll have those letters ready for you. All right, any more questions? You're welcome, Leanne. The supplier team has worked so hard and they're very excited about this new process. And I think it's going to benefit you guys, the users, and then also our team as well. All right. Well, if you thought this presentation was super helpful, then next week we're really going to get down into the details. And if you have been identified as a supplier liaison, you'll be more than ready for your supplier questions.
And thank you everyone again, and another special thank you to Douglas for all the hard work he's done on this project. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, I think that's all that we have right now. Everyone's saying thank you. And we want to say thank you for joining us, and to have a great rest of your day. And hopefully we'll see you online next week.